Happy Thursday, everybody. Sam Shapiro back here with more of your Heat latest on FanArc. Don't forget to drop a like on this video and, of course, subscribe for great daily content all pertaining to Miami Heat culture right here Monday through Friday. A mega blockbuster deal recently proposed by NBA writer Andy Bailey definitely has me and I think some other Heat fans thinking this is a very interesting proposal. And while the Heat would be giving up a lot in this blockbuster deal, I definitely think it could be something that honestly wouldn't be the worst investment in the world going forward in terms of Miami trying to acquire that next superstar, like I was kind of mentioning in the previous episode. And that one definitely being kind of an interesting take here. Karl-Anthony Towns involved in a 5-team deal overall. Really the kind of overhaul of it would be the Knicks getting Giannis Antetokounmpo out of this deal. But this NBA proposal would kind of involve sending Wiggins and Rozier from Miami and Harrison Barnes from the San Antonio Spurs all to the Milwaukee Bucks just to get Giannis on the move. But I really liked this deal just because Karl-Anthony Towns, Miami would be getting a superstar quality player out of this investment. So kind of to get into the details of this proposed trade, the Knicks would get Giannis Antetokounmpo. Milwaukee would get Andrew Wiggins, Terry Rozier, Harrison Barnes, a 2026 first-round pick from New York, a 2030 first-round pick from Miami, and then a 2030 first-round pick swap from New York. And then to go along with that, a 2032 first-round pick swap from New York, and then a 2032 first-round pick from Miami, and then a top 50 protected 2031 second-round pick from the Utah Jazz, and then 3 second-round picks from the Knicks. So Milwaukee pretty much moving on from Giannis Antetokounmpo in this trade, but getting a plethora of draft assets in addition to a handful of players as well. Miami getting Karl-Anthony Towns in that deal as well, which quite honestly would completely fill the need in terms of what this Miami front court is really looking for, pairing up Karl-Anthony Towns with Bam Adebayo and then also having Kel'el Ware. And then not to mention, you're not even giving up Tyler Herro either, which just creates so much extra star power for Miami, especially in the front court now. I mean, granted, Karl-Anthony Towns isn't, I would say, a shining star defensively, but you got Bam Adebayo to really hold it down, at least in terms of rim protection and overall defensive ability. So just having those two guys starting at the 4 and 5 respectively, and then Kel'el Ware really being able to come off the bench, I mean, that would be quite honestly unbelievable. And the only two players Miami would be giving up at that point in time would be Rozier and Wiggins, despite giving up some future draft flexibility, which I know Miami is kind of prioritizing right now. But to get into the rest of the trade, the Spurs would get Lauri Markkanen, and then the Jazz would get Keldon Johnson, Bobby Portis, Jeremy Shokin, and Tyler Kolek, a 2029 first-round pick from the Spurs, and then a 2031 first-round pick from San Antonio as well. So again, although Utah would be getting rid of Markkanen, they would be getting some decent draft assets and a couple of players to go along with that, although I don't necessarily think Utah would kind of really be benefiting in that deal in any way, shape, or form. But San Antonio, I guess, trying to get some, ultimately trying to get some assets out of that, get a star to come there, and then unfortunately giving up a lot to Utah. But drop in the comments if you think this trade is kind of just all over the place and completely outrageous. I think it's a little, I don't think all 5 teams would necessarily be on board with it just to get Giannis Antetokounmpo to play in the Big Apple and Karl-Anthony Towns to go down to South Beach. But definitely, I think could be interesting for at least the Knicks and the Heat in this regard. And I don't really think Milwaukee would completely would be willing to give up their franchise, player really for even that amount of assets, although it kind of gives them full flexibility to make a full-blown rebuild in that regard. But drop in the comments what you think of that deal. I definitely think in terms of acquiring a star big man that could really fill the niche Miami is looking for to kind of fill in their front court right now would definitely give them some solid ground, especially, and would make them a major contender in the Eastern Conference, so to speak. And it'd be interesting to see how the Knicks and the Heat would kind of fare against each other throughout the regular season, and if they would kind of become big rivals that would constantly clash, kind of how we've seen Miami with Boston over the past couple of seasons. So I definitely think it was an interesting mega blockbuster trade proposed that I don't think will ever happen because of just how many moving parts there are to it. But I mean, I'd like to see Miami get Karl-Anthony Towns, especially given that you're getting rid of $60 million between Wiggins and Rozier to maybe acquire Karl-Anthony Towns in that trade. I'm not sure if Miami would have the flexibility to sign Karl-Anthony Towns for that, in terms of a like a longer type of deal, but I could definitely see him at least, maybe picking up a 1-year, $50 million deal at least in that trade, or depending on how things would kind of transpire going forward. But drop in the comments what you think of that proposal, if it's a little all over the place, or if Miami would benefit giving up that amount of assets to acquire a superstar big man to add in their front court. And now moving over to another mock trade. I know I had mentioned Ja Morant a little bit in yesterday's episode as well, but what price exactly would Miami, necessarily have to pay to get this superstar guard? And I think it's pretty obvious that if Miami wasn't willing to extend Tyler Herro and give him the kind of money that he's hoping to make over the course of the next couple of years, that maybe pivoting towards that superstar player Miami wants to build around being Ja Morant necessarily wouldn't be the worst idea in the world. Now, do I think Pat Riley would want to sign up for some of what comes with signing Ja Morant? Maybe not necessarily, but Ja Morant has kind of, when he's healthy, and when he's found his way to kind of stay on the court, has obviously shown that he can be a franchise player that a team can be built around. And quite honestly, I think that if, you are able to build Kel'el Ware and Bam Adebayo around Ja Morant, this team maybe could make the Eastern Conference Finals and potentially have a finals berth in there as well, just because of the superstar Ja Morant is compared to what Tyler Herro is. I mean, obviously, I would say Ja Morant is an overall better player than Tyler Herro. So maybe a deal swapping both of those players wouldn't technically be the worst idea in the world. I mean, if Ja Morant can stay healthy and stay on the court, depending on how much money he would want in the future, that all kind of factors into it as well. But in this mock-up trade, I saw the Grizzlies would receive Tyler Herro and Jaime Jaquez, as well as a first-round pick, in exchange for Ja Morant. However, this might be a bit of a big asking price, just because Ja Morant, he's only won one playoff series during his time in Memphis so far, and obviously Tyler Herro has kind of been part of more of a winning culture, at least with Miami right now. So to say that it'd be worth that trade to hope that Ja Morant would kind of lead Miami into a deep postseason run would be almost a little bit crazy to say at this point in time. But you have to remember, the Eastern Conference a lot less tough than the West. And considering how Memphis got kind of dismantled by the Thunder this past season, and now with Desmond Bane out of the picture there, Memphis could be completely looking to tear it all down and kind of just rebuild, especially their backcourt now with Bane not in the picture as well. So drop in the comments if you think Miami would be giving up too much in that regard. I would kind of like to see, maybe swapping that first-round pick out for Terry Rozier, just because you're getting that money that Miami desperately wants off the plate out of the way right now. And then Miami clearly doesn't really want him in terms of, a player that can really contribute in their backcourt anymore, just because of how he's digressed during his time in the 305. And I kind of understand that, but I don't necessarily know if giving up Tyler Herro and Jaime Jaquez is definitely worth, a bargain for the superstar guards. So drop in the comments if you think that trade would potentially be worth Miami's time. I don't think maybe giving up all those assets for the superstar point guard would be worth it. But if you're looking at it from a star power stacking standpoint, pairing up Ja Morant with Bam Adebayo, and then seeing how, even Andrew Wiggins, not part of this deal, how he would pair up with Wiggins and then Kel'el Ware could be very interesting, and, could be a better roster than maybe many people would expect potentially going forward. And then another deal that also was kind of in talks towards the deadline last year, Miami was trying to see if they could swing Jimmy Butler in a deal for Brandon Ingram. And that kind of raised the question for me, is a deal like that still even possible? Kind of to a similar situation 8 years ago where they were trying to potentially create some sort of swap involving Ingram and some other assets in exchange for Jimmy Butler. And I just think that, because of the scoring ability Ingram has, obviously now that deal would probably look like more of a swap Wiggins for Brandon Ingram. But I feel like Brandon Ingram is a slightly more talented scorer in certain aspects. But I think the ceiling for Wiggins to potentially develop into a solid veteran player that could really be a contributing starter in whatever team he ends up with also weighs into that as well. But Ingram, 27 years old, slightly younger than, not even 30 yet, kind of a little bit younger than Wiggins, but, you know, very, very tall, lengthy player, can score from pretty much anywhere on the floor. I just think that when you look at Wiggins' overall ability in terms of athleticism, both are very comparable players. And I definitely think a deal for potentially the two of them maybe getting swapped isn't completely out of the picture yet. So drop in the comments if you think that trade line kind of deal we saw involving Ingram and Butler now kind of could potentially be on the table going into this next season, only you're flipping instead of Jimmy Butler, Wiggins, and maybe Rozier in that deal as well, just because Miami, again, pretty much desperate to trade him at this point. And if, the solo swap of players wasn't enough, you could definitely throw Rozier in there as well. That would kind of make it a decent 2-for-1 kind of deal in terms of, trying to get the value, looking for what Ingram could really offer Miami going into next season. And then another deal that I also kind of thought was worth kind of debating a little bit, what true value could Miami potentially get out of Andrew Wiggins, towards the end of the season if, potentially he doesn't develop into the player that Miami is kind of hoping for. And one of the proposals I saw kind of involving the Dallas Mavericks. Now, this one I wasn't really a fan of because I didn't really see Miami getting a all-star, at least scoring caliber type of player, which I think Brandon Ingram is. But then also in those other two trades that I proposed, Karl-Anthony Towns and John Morant, pure superstars that although Miami is giving up a lot in those potential trades, would definitely be adding instant star power to kind of complement with Bam Adebayo, because Bam not involved in either of those proposals, which I think is very interesting because of the defensive gap he could kind of help fulfill. And although him and Tyler Herro aren't really getting it done, the two of them right now, if you pair up somebody that's arguably slightly more talented with Herro, that recipe could look a little bit different in terms of the caliber of star player that is playing together in Miami. So the proposal that I saw from Dallas specifically that was kind of floating around online was Miami would send Andrew Wiggins to Dallas while they would receive Daniel Gafford, PJ Washington, and a future first-round pick. And I thought this was interesting because Miami, again, not giving up Tyler Herro, not giving up Bam Adebayo, but also kind of getting some decent prospect players that could add some depth to Miami, both double-figure scorers that could, really contribute to the rotation and would ultimately probably free up some more cap space for Miami to then look for another superstar and getting rid of Andrew Wiggins, assuming that he is not going to maybe take that player option going into the, next free agency and then become an unrestricted free agent and jump ship. But at this point, you're kind of getting, like I said, two double-figure scoring players. You're getting some draft assets, at least in the first round, that could be a quality pick going forward. And you're kind of just really losing Andrew Wiggins. So drop in the comments if you think that would potentially be that would be a decent haul worth for Andrew Wiggins. I think especially if he doesn't develop into the player Miami is hoping that he's going to be this season, that could be great because those players could also complement Norman Powell very, very decently as well. And again, would add some depth, just adding really quality players up until that 9th, 10th guy or player really in the rotation that you're not necessarily have at this point in time right now. That's not to say that some of the guards that have, been developing especially, or really players overall that have been developing over the course of the summer can't become those players right now. And then I think you really have to think about holding on to Wiggins and then what moves forward from there. But I think those are some guys that if Miami did choose to trade for them could kind of come in and then hopefully wouldn't, regress in terms of play like we've kind of seen with Rozier, and could ultimately go and contribute to Miami, at least adding some depth in the rotation and then kind of creating some wiggle rooms for a superstar to come in, and then those players would complement that superstar, hopefully running the show for Miami going forward, and could potentially lead them to hopefully another title run and then actually getting over the hump and winning the championship. So drop in the comments if you think that trade would be a little bit ridiculous, giving up Andrew Wiggins for a bunch of, decent assets, or if Wiggins would be worth holding on to more in the grand scheme of things. Personally, I want to see how Andrew Wiggins kind of marinates with this team going forward, but I see both sides of the argument for sure. Well, that's going to do it for today's episode of Your Heat Latest here from FanArc. Don't forget to drop a like on this video and, of course, subscribe to our channel for great daily content, all pertaining to Miami Heat culture, Monday through Friday right here. Thanks again so much for joining us this Thursday. I'm Sam Shapiro. Have a great day.